Raising children is difficult, and with so much information out there, it's hard to know what advice to trust. The Child Psych podcast brings you the top parenting and mental health experts in the world. This podcast is designed to encourage and educate you with the most up-to-date research and concrete strategies that foster healing and resiliency in children and teens, and tools that make parenting easier. Whether you're a professional or parent, you will walk away with answers that empower you, and you'll feel more confident knowing you are on the right path. Most importantly, we're here because we need to raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhoods.
Hello and welcome to the Child Psych podcast. I'm Tania Johnson, registered psychologist, registered play therapist, co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology. Today we are incredibly excited to have Paris Goodyear-Brown with us. Welcome, Paris.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we've been so excited. And as I mentioned, I've been devouring your book this past week. But before we get there, let me do a quick introduction. Paris is a licensed clinical social worker, is the creator of the trauma play model, the founder and clinical director of Nurture House, and the executive director of the Trauma Play Institute. She's an internationally renowned speaker, a prolific author, and a master clinician. While she has spent the past 25 years specializing in treating trauma and attachment disturbances, as well as anxiety disorders, she often provides help for angry, dysregulated, and depressed children and teens. She's an adjunct instructor of psychiatric mental health at Vanderbilt University, guest lecturer for several universities in Middle Tennessee, and travels around the world helping clinicians, parents, and teachers better serve children from hard places. Paris has written a number of groundbreaking books, and as I mentioned, the one that I have been reading this past week is called Parents as Partners in Child Therapy, a Clinician's Guide. Paris, I feel like if we had unlimited time in a beautiful universe, we would probably do a podcast on each and every chapter. It is so full.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if doing a podcast on each chapter would keep each of us in our, as you talk about in this book, our optimal arousal zone.
Well, I find the work with the parents, it's really where it's at. It's also the most challenging piece of our work because, and I hadn't realized before that you're a registered play therapist. I'm a registered play therapist supervisor.
Oh, incredible.
So the shared belief in the power of play in all of this, in our model in trauma play, what we have found is that many clinicians know how to work individually with kids really well, but that's already a lot to hold their autonomic nervous system and ours, and then to bring a parent into the mix and hold all three nervous systems is, it's more. And parents need so much to be held themselves. It's really important for the trauma work that we do.
Paris, you have this beautiful visual in your book. You talk about the cascade of care that just resonated with me so beautifully. That when we invite parents into the play therapy room, the therapist pours this cascade of care into the parent, who then pours a cascade of care into the child.
Yeah. We there are three roles in trauma play that we're always, as the therapist, trying to embody first for parents so they can absorb those roles and then give them to their children. And those three roles are safe boss, nurture, and story keeper. And what we found is, trying to sort of just talk at parents doesn't really help. They need to feel liked and supported and honored. And then we can become safe boss, nurture, and story keeper for them in ways that they can then pass that on to the kids that they serve.
Oh, that's beautiful. I really want to talk about story keeper today, but before we go there, could we just very briefly touch for parents on, when we talk about safe bosses and nurturers, what those roles incorporate?
Yeah, so we've sort of taken attachment literature from the last 70 years and sort of tried to cull it down to what we think are these three primary jobs of parents, and we tend to move in and out of each of these roles many, many times a day: safe boss, nurture, and story keeper. And we sort of have, if you think about it as a triad of therapist roles and parent roles, we've sort of put Safe Boss at the top. If you think about it in terms of bottom-up brain development, though, the reptilian brainstem always asking, am I safe? The limbic brain asking, am I loved? And then the thinking brain asking, what can I learn from this? The Safe Boss piece, like regulation first, because co-regulation by a parent always precedes self-regulation by a child. And I just think that's worth saying a second time. Co-regulation always precedes self-regulation. So that Safe Boss piece is really, really important as the foundation for everything else. So I don't know, have you ever been in a VR headset, Tanya?
Yes, I
Like,
have.
okay,
Yes.
so those my son has one and he was like, try this on. So when you put it on the first time, what it says before anything else is set your boundary,
Oh,
confirm your guardian. And then you have these little haptic sensors and you draw a circle around yourself and you're not free to play, explore, grow, develop, challenge yourself until the boundaries are set. So that Safe Boss piece is really critical.
what a lovely analogy. I love that. So we put that in place so that our kids can explore and play. The
Yes.
children engage in the important work of childhood.
Yeah, yeah. And what we find is some parents are really good at that piece when they come in. We do a lot of assessment. We call it dyadic assessment. So looking at parent and child playing together. And some parents come in really good at Safe Boss. They can provide a lot of structure for their kids, but they might need a little more support in providing nurture. And then other parents who are very strong in nurturing and might need a little more support in being Safe Boss and providing structure for their child. So we find that those times together help us know kind of how to build out a parent's toolkit a little bit.
Mm.
And the nurture dynamic is, well, really all of the cascade of care is built on the idea that you can only give what you've received, you know? And if our parents have not received, like in my own childhood, I was pretty adultified. You know, I was celebrated in my independence and exploration. So when I became a grown-up, it was easy for me to support my own kids in their independence and exploration. It was sort of a growing edge to also welcome them in their neediness too, and delight in their neediness as much as delighting in their achievements. And so that nurture piece of you brought your beautiful brown eyes with you today, and just the snuggles and the loves and the just being connected. If a parent didn't get that in their own childhood, they really benefit from some support, you
Mm.
know?
I love that word delighting in. It lights me up. I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful.
Mhm. I do think, there's in the field of play therapy, there's about 20 core agents of change. We call them the therapeutic powers of play. But I think all of those can be encapsulated in delight. I think when families have been through hard things, there has been a stripping away of delight, and there's now lots of distress. Parents are often exhausted, and I don't think it's too strong a word to say they might even be a little disgusted, either with the child's big behaviors or their own feelings of helplessness to impact them or shift them much. And so that delight, protecting space to help parents and children get some of those experiences that maybe they've been robbed of, or to help the parent, foster or adoptive parent, offer kind of, the attachment experiences that a child didn't get if they had abuse and those things early on.
So incredibly important. So we go safe fast, the delighting, the nurture, and then we move into storytelling, which is more cognitive, but involves all three levels still.
Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
right. In my mind, we can't until we've answered those, bottom brain questions, those lower brain region questions. Am I safe? And am I loved with yes, moving into safe boss and nurturer, then we don't really have the neocortex on board to even ask the question, what can I learn from this? And then once we do, the biggest issue is making sure that the stories we tell are developmentally appropriate to the need of the child or the system. The next book, I'm writing Big Behaviors 2 right now, but when I'm done with that, the next book I want to write is called Tell the Truth to the Children.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not sure we're really good at it as a culture, and kids need to know, particularly around trauma, They need to know what it is that has happened. They can already feel it in the room, in their bodies, in their parents' distress. But we often sort of skirt around it a little bit, which can actually scare kids more than if we could matter-of-factly name suicide, cancer, sexual assault. Those things are very hard for us as grown-ups and parents to say. We want to protect our children from them. But children are actually quite benefited from having the understanding of what we call this thing. This is addiction. What you're seeing here in mom or dad's behaviors, that's addiction. And there's an explanation for it.
It's putting words to the feelings that they probably have in their body already. Children are so incredibly wise.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Paris, I agree with you. I feel like as a culture, and it's interesting, as I was reading your book, there's so much that I was trying to figure out what are we going to talk about in 30 minutes, because there's so much that I wanted to talk to you about. And you go quite deeply into storytelling in your last chapter, Parents as Storytellers. And I think that one really resonated for me, because I know that when I've sat in session with parents, that very often we have a hard time telling stories. And so I thought we could talk a little bit today on how incredibly powerful parents can be as storytellers for their kids, and then how parents even start with that.
Yeah. Well, so maybe I can start with talking a little bit about a prompt we use in our dyadic assessment, because we've now seen thousands of parent and child dyads go through some of these tasks on cards. And one of the tasks says, I actually see your TheraPlay book behind you, and from the Marshak interaction method, and it says, adult tells the child a story about when the child was a little baby, beginning with the words, when you were a little baby, or if they're foster or adoptive, it would be when you first came to live with me or when I first met you. And over the years, there's been such a powerful, I don't know, grouping of these kinds of stories that parents tell. And there's a whole group of parents who come into the playroom and they say, oh, come here, come sit on my lap. I get to tell you a story about when you were a little baby. And the child comes quickly to them. There's usually some sort of touch or close physical proximity, and the child is eagerly awaiting the story. They know it's going to be a delighting in story. They've probably heard it before and can tell little bits of it themselves. So and this is research that we're like at the beginning stages of. We're actually creating a baby story coding instrument to be able to look at how does a parent tell a story. And, they're already sort of put on the spot a little bit in this weird clinical setting. They're trying to come up with a story. And when they can tell a delighting in story, it often says something about the delight in the system at other times. Sometimes the parent comes in and says, when you were a little baby, I just don't remember, and that's more of maybe if there was postpartum depression in the mix or those kinds of things, that child, the parent may need some support in tracing backwards and finding stories of delight to share with their child. And then there's a third category of parents who will say, when you were a little baby, you cried all the time. And I just couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I just couldn't. And often those parents need a lot of support around attuning a little more deeply to their child's needs, and having stories of delight even told about the parent. One of my favorite things to do is to catch parents in the moment where they're doing just really instinctive holding of a child's hard story, and allowing it just to be hard or yucky in this instant. And when I can catch that in a parent and reinforce it, parents become more and more stretched in their own ability to hold the hard stories of their children. It pains us. I have 3 children. It pains me deeply when my child has experienced a hard thing. And it's even harder when I'm the cause of that hard thing, which also happens all the time in our parenting. The older I get, the more convinced I am parenting is really rupture and repair, rupture and repair. That's what we're doing. And so the goal gets to be being really good at repair, which includes being good at story keeping, creating the coherent narrative of what happened there. My feelings got hurt or your feelings got hurt, and maybe you felt these ways, and then you have a redo and, you can repair it. But you do have to be able to keep the story, hold the story of the hard thing that happened.
And I think there's actually an example of this in your book. I think as parents, when we do retell stories, we often try and put this kind of happy swing on it at the end. So, like, oh, and everything turned out fine, instead of being able to actually hold it, like you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, I think it actually is our children's, it deepens children's trust in us when we not knowing, especially when there are things like divorce and children are living in two homes, or it's not really clear when there's going to be another visit with the parent who might be incarcerated, or, all those sorts of things. Parents who can say, I'm not, I really don't know. I'm not able to give you assurance about this, but we'll sit in the unknown together. That sticking together through hard things is what we want to communicate most in our story keeping.
It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. When we look at stories and the importance of stories, how do they shape a child's sense of who they are in the world?
Yeah. I would say that the stories we are told as children are the stories we become
Mm.
as adults,
Mm.
until or unless we learn a new story.
Mm.
So when we think about early attachment behaviors and, the secure attachment pattern, and then the insecure, avoidant, and ambivalent, and, that's sort of fancier speak, but really the ways that we cope to stay close to our caregivers, when our caregivers are telling us stories about our competencies and our grit and our ability to do hard things, and that we are delightful, even if our behaviors are sometimes not. Um, that raises a child who can say, I am awesome and I am flawed. Both can be true together. And I think kids love to have, I don't know if this was true. You probably could tell me a story from your family of origin right now. If I said, when you guys get together at Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff, what are the stories that are told every single time you come together? Families tell stories as a way to build a sense of family identity. And so when we can tell delighting in stories to our children, they develop both a sense of their own goodness, and also their ability to impact the world, their self-efficacy. And if we tell children, if we rehearse too many times the stories of their badness, then we can actually collude with a pattern of reinforcing, negative self-esteem. So I think the story, plus there's just something to, I'm remembering about you, that, in that phrase, we teach it to parents here, and we watch kids start to breathe in. My parent really does know me. They have me. I belong. I have a sense of belonging with this parent because they keep my stories for me. Even things as simple as, and we start to do that as therapists in the building too. I'm remembering about you that you like the purple gumballs, right? It's a very simple thing, but even foster and adoptive families can begin to build in those, I'm remembering about you, that moments and stories, even early on as they're just getting to know each other.
Oh, it's beautiful. There's something I'm trying to remember what you call it in the book. So it's called the third ear, when you tell a story about a child to, so the parent tells the therapist and the child is listening, how incredibly
Yeah.
powerful it is too.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of different ways to tell stories to children and with children. And sometimes, especially if children have experienced adverse childhood experiences very early in life, those formative years, from in utero injuries all the way to about age 3, they're not going to have a lot of language for the hurts that they've experienced. So their parents often have to help with that a little bit more. If parents are the holder of those story keeping pieces, but kids can feel protected and safer if, they get to be under a blanket or maybe swinging on our magic carpet swing in the backyard. And I'm saying, Mom, just keep your eyes on me. Can you tell me the story of how did that car accident go exactly? And the child gets to let it wash over them. Sometimes children will then participate spontaneously and say, oh, and I also smelled, or I had that metal taste in my mouth, that can come with the adrenaline release. They'll add pieces to their story. So the third ear is when the child gets to absorb from a very safe place any parts of narrative that have been incoherent before. But kids are different, all different from each other. And so there are other children who will want to co-create narrative with their parents. And there are even some children who will probably disagree with the narrative that the parent might make on their own. So we want to be careful, especially in trauma work, to just make sure the parent has a coherent narrative themselves and are ready to hold in that way for a child therapeutically. But from day to day, like it would just be really neat if we all got in a habit of at least once a week, maybe, daily would be awesome, but of just telling a delighting story about our child. Yes. Some cute moment, some shared moment of laughter, some new achievement, some tender kindness they showed to someone else. These are the moments we want to rehearse.
It's beautiful. And I love that. Bringing it back to what parents can do at home is, as you say, just on a regular basis, find it delighting. And the first time you rode a bike, the first time I dropped you off at kindergarten, those little stories. When parents are practicing this at home, Paris, any thoughts for them on what they should try and remember?
Well, one of the things parents are just very, very busy. It can be hard to carve out. I feel like it's we have to be fierce warriors just to push back the space to even slow down enough to rehearse stories. It's part of why the assessment is intervention when we're asking parents to tell these kinds of stories at the beginning of treatment, because we move so fast. So it might be useful to create a space in your home. We call them nurture nooks here at Nurture House. That's our practice. And it's just a little carved out corner, maybe with some pillows and a blanket and a space that is almost a retreat for the parent child together to sit. And they might read stories together in that space. They might do boo-boo routines in that space, checking the child's body for hurts and then telling a delighting story. We have a very specific intervention that we sometimes offer to parents with, I'm sure you're aware of Gary Chapman's work in the love languages and so forth. So we call them delighting in dice. And we actually create personalized die for each child in the family and each parent in the family. And then they spin those dice in the nurture nook. And let's say it's a child, Johnny, who's like 5 years old, and his love language is physical touch. And so on his little die, he might have high fives and fist bumps and snuggle. And so he just gets to spin it or flip it. And then whatever it lands on, the parent and child engage in that physical touch behavior together.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that would not be a constant. I want to, pull parents, my high achieving parents that I work with, they think if 5 minutes is good, 20 minutes is better. But it's honestly a lot we're asking them. It's a titration of a dose of intimacy and connection. And our kids can only hold so much of that at one time too. And it's another encouragement I would just want to give to parents on this podcast that when I was raising, especially when I was raising young kids, there was this constant tug between all the other things I have to do in the world, dishes and responding to emails and et cetera, and like quality time with my children. And it was one day when a girlfriend said to me, do you know that for forever and ever and ever, like kids were put in the strapped on the back and the parents went out and worked in the fields and they did all the things they had to do without this quality time in the dosing of it being, I think parents feel pressured that we're supposed to be communing with our children all day, every day. And I would say be encouraged, even 5 minutes of intentional connecting time each day can make an enormous difference in the quality of relationship that the parent-child have.
So powerful. So powerful. And I love that it's not another, no, now he's going to spend an hour of special playtime every day, which I think parents it's so stressful. Whereas this is so simple. It's like, let me tell a delighting story. Let me just for those 5 minutes be present, put down my phone, be connected, see if we can sit somewhere small and cozy together. Paris, as you're talking today, I've got two little girls, and their favorite stories that they love to hear is when they were born. They've asked me to tell them that story 100 times. It's incredible because it's just this connection. It's just this golden thread that just weaves everything together for them.
I think that's true. Yeah. Story keeping. And I would say too that there's the delighting in stories. They provide a safety scaffolding, like a really strong foundation of connected, nurturing stories before and in case there's something harder that comes along. And that parent will have already practiced story keeping in positive ways. And the child will already be oriented to ready for the parent to become a co-organizer in any harder story that happens in that family system.
Oh, it's a buffer. It's just that buffer around them. Beautiful. Paris, thank you so much. This is just, it's so rich and I think so important for parents to hear.
Yeah, well, we love our parent work here. And I mean, when we can help a parent to create a paradigm shift, the other thing I'd say about story keeping in general and that bottom-up brain development is many of the children that we see with trauma have had in utero injuries. And when then they engage in big behaviors and the parent may think this is my fault because I've had them since they were born. But we spend a lot of time, especially with foster and adoptive parents, helping them understand some of those early hurts that may have happened as their brain was developing in utero, so that we can let the parent kind of off the hook of shame that they might feel, because shame really gets in the way of shift for parents. And so anything we can do to delight in the parent, help them experience their own goodness and that they're doing the very best they know how to do at this moment in time, I think is well worth the investment we make,
It's a cascade of care again. If the parent feels delighted in, they're more likely to delight in instead of feeling overwhelmed and as if they're failing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, parents need a lot of holding too, and I would say at times parents, to earn a secure attachment in adulthood, if you didn't have a really secure attachment in your childhood, it does require somebody coming alongside of you and being your story keeper first as the grown-up for you to stretch that ability. That's how you earn a secure attachment in adulthood. You could have had a really crappy childhood, but you have one person who walks alongside you and holds your story. It might be your college roommate or your spouse or your best friend or a therapist. But as you build coherence, the parent in their own narratives, they are much more present and available to their child's joys and hurts and are able to hold the grief and gratitude together better.
So Paris, as we end off with parents, would you say that would be a starting point for many parents, is to reflect on their own narrative first and to see if they may need some healing with that coherent narrative?
Yes, we have. I wish that wasn't the case, but yes. In our, we have like a whole set of treatment goals that are geared specifically for the parent work. And one of them we call the RAW work, RAW, standing for reflective attachment work. But it's because this work, looking at our own histories as grown-ups and parents, does make us raw. It's tender work. And you need someone you trust to help you with it. But as we build our own reflective capacity, we look backwards at the parts of our parenting we want to keep and those maybe we don't want to repeat. That's the beginning of a template for how we will be more connected with our own children.
Which is built in so much hope. I love it.
Well,
thank you, Paris. Yeah. So we will link your website below. There's so many wonderful, wonderful resources for clinicians, for parents, for people who are just trying to find out about trauma. Really such important work, Paris. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.